You are about to see the most incredible doll ever invented. Her name is Poppy, and she is the first truly intelligent doll in the world. A little girl can talk to her. Poppy gives her answers. She is the first doll actually able to have a conversation with a child. Hard to believe? Just watch.
Poppy Playtime!
Poppy's as lovable as a real girl, and she talks like one, too.
Hi, my name is Poppy. I love you. Can you help me polish my shoes?
Why, of course, Poppy. Just like a real girl, Poppy always wants to look her best.
Perfect! Thank you.
Her hair is sturdy and won't come out when you brush it, and smells just like a poppy flower. Is there anything else you'd like to say, Poppy?
I'm a real girl, just like you.
What's the time?
Playtime!
And if you've ever wanted to see how all of the nation's favorite toys were created, Playtime Co. is now offering factory tours at just $2.99 a person. An entire hour in the most magical toy factory on Earth. What are you waiting for? Come visit the factory. We can't...
When I was 7 years old, my neighbor would sneak in through my closet. I don't remember when it started. I was too young. Johnny, one of my neighbors, used to sneak in through the crawl space at the back of my closet to play. Even now, I can still picture him so clearly in my head, his sharp blue eyes embedded in sunken sockets, his filthy, unwashed hands, fingernails overgrown and caked in dirt, his crooked smile with 3 front teeth missing. I can smell him too. The musk of sweat and grime, the sickly sweet stench of someone who's been rolling in grass and dead leaves. He seems like such a recent memory, even now, 19 years later. As much as I want to, I can't forget him. Not after what happened in the summer of 2006. Knock, knock, knock. 3 knocks from inside my closet. That was the sign that Johnny was there. I opened the door, greeted by my friend, his toothy smile on full display. I returned the gesture, inviting him into my room. Hurry up! I want to show you the new game I got. Pokemon Emerald had come out a year prior, and I had just managed to scrounge up enough money to buy it. I took Johnny by the wrist, his lanky frame bending awkwardly to accommodate. He didn't protest. He listened intently as I explained the game mechanics, his eyes glued to the screen. That's one of the things I liked about Johnny. He was an adult, but he didn't treat me like all the other grown-ups did. He listened to what I had to say. He made me feel seen. Maybe that's why I didn't tell anyone sooner. After around 30 minutes, Johnny told me that he had something of his own that he wanted me to see. I perked up, temporarily distracted from my game. I found it at the park today, he said, extending a cheap camera for me to hold. I didn't want to put him down. I had a way nicer one than that, but he was obviously proud of it. Neat, I said, turning it over in my hands. Want to take a picture? Johnny nodded, a grin inching across his lips. I leaned in and he took a snapshot of us. We couldn't see what it looked like. He'd need to get the film developed for that. Or, cool, I'll give you one when I get them back. We suddenly heard footsteps creaking down the hall. Johnny's eyes grew wide. We knew what that meant. He scrambled to my closet, shutting himself inside before my mother reached my room to tell me that dinner was ready. I didn't see Johnny very much after that. That wasn't too unusual, though. Sometimes he would go a week or so without coming to see me. I think about 10 days had passed before I heard the signal from my closet again. Knock, knock, knock. I eagerly leapt up and threw open the door. Johnny's familiar grin was there to greet me. He accompanied me to the rug where we usually sat, stationed in front of the tube TV. Come on, Johnny. You said you'd play Jenga with me last time. I got the blocks set up already, I said, tugging him to where the tower sat undisturbed from when I'd built it days prior. Yeah, I remember. But first, I got something for you, he said, pulling a photograph from his pocket. I'd forgotten all about it. Here, this is for you. He handed it to me, and I glanced down at our smiling faces. My eyes traveled from the photo to the corkboard on my wall. Johnny understood the implication. Joey, you gotta keep this picture somewhere safe, okay? Somewhere your mom can't find it. We'll both get in big trouble if she sees. I nodded. We'd been over this plenty of times before. Mom couldn't know about Johnny. Not ever. If she found out, he wouldn't be able to come over anymore. Attaboy, he said, ruffling my hair. Now let's get to this Jenga game. Johnny started coming by more frequently after that. He began showing up almost nightly, to the point where it was becoming routine. He would knock, I'd let him in, and we'd play with action figures or board games or draw pictures until Mom would come down the hall and scare him off. I didn't have many friends in school, so I really enjoyed our arrangement. That is, until one night when Johnny came back. Different. A day went by without him popping in, then 2, then 3. After I hadn't heard from him in 2 weeks, I was starting to worry. What if something bad happened? As much as his absence shook me, I knew there wasn't a thing I could do about it. I was just a kid. But to my relief, eventually, he did come back. Now I wish he never did. I was sitting on my bed reading a comic book when I heard it. 3 knocks from inside my closet. These didn't sound like Johnny's regular knocks, though. They were quicker, more frantic. I didn't register the difference at first. I was just happy that Johnny had finally returned. I leapt off my bed and raced over to the door, throwing it open with a huge grin on my face. I expected to find Johnny standing there, bearing that same toothy smile that he always did. But when I opened that door, I was met with a different sight. Johnny stood before me, but he wasn't smiling. He looked even dirtier than he normally did, the coat he wore pockmarked with holes and his hands caked in a layer of grime. He had scabs on his face, as if he'd been relentlessly picking at the flesh. His eyes darted around the room, shifting from one object to another. My heart dropped. I could tell that something was wrong. "Johnny, are you okay?" I asked, a sudden feeling of unease coursing through me. Johnny's eyes snapped to me, his scleras marred by spiderwebbing red veins. He grabbed my wrist and tried ushering me toward the closet. "Joey, there's something I have to show you. Come with me." He pulled me hard, his dirty fingernails digging into my flesh. Little red droplets appeared, tumbling onto the floor. By that point, I was scared. This man was not the gentle, caring friend I knew. I screamed, both out of fear and pain. I could hear Mom's footsteps crashing down the hall in response. Normally, Johnny would have hidden at the sound, but not this time. He was determined to take me with him. "Joey, you have to see this. I need you to see this. They're going to get me soon." Tears involuntarily welled in my eyes. I didn't know what Johnny had to show me, and I didn't want to know. Fortunately, I would never have to see what it was. Mom burst into my room in full mama bear mode. It took her a moment to register what was happening, but the second she did, she rushed over to us and began hitting Johnny as hard as she could. He eventually let go of me and fell to the floor. Then Mom scooped me up and bolted down the hall and into her room, where she locked the door and phoned the police. I didn't see Johnny being let out of the house in handcuffs. I'm glad I didn't. I think that image would have stuck with me for a long time. Mom had long since forgotten about the panel at the back of my closet, buried by old clothes and shoes. Inside was a small storage room. It turns out that there was never a crawl space that led outside. I'd been lied to, but even more disturbing was what the police found in their search. Among a slew of wrappers and empty food containers, they discovered a sleeping bag, dozens of dirty needles, and photographs. Hundreds of them. I was in every single one. Walking home from school, eating breakfast, playing with the neighborhood kids. I didn't know how he got some of them. That still terrifies me. How many times had Johnny been lurking just out of sight? Additionally, they found a notebook. It only had one entry. The photograph that I'd taken with Johnny was taped inside with the words, "Johnny and Joey, best friends forever," written beneath. I don't know how many years he received. We moved shortly after he was apprehended, and Mom didn't ever bring it up again. I don't blame her. I tried my best to forget. But even after all this time, I can't get it out of my head. Sometimes I glance down at the tiny scar on my wrist, and I wonder what would have happened if I'd followed Johnny into that room. I worked 32 years as a midwife. This is the horrifying thing I ever experienced. Ever since I was a little girl, I wanted to be a midwife. There was something magical about being there when new life came into the world. I loved everything about it. Not even the night shifts, rude patients, or distant fathers could ruin it for me. But everything changed the night a heavily pregnant woman walked into our delivery room. She had no ID and wore a worn tracksuit. She said her name was Greta. I still don't know if that was her real name. She looked pale and underfed, with bloodshot eyes. Her cervix was already 5 centimeters dilated, so Emma, our doctor on duty, decided to admit her. Her vitals were normal. Over the next few hours, labor progressed and we induced delivery. Everything seemed fine at first. Then Greta's body seized up. Her eyes rolled back and thick veins bulged across her belly. I'd never seen anything like it and called for help. But by the time the senior doctor arrived, Greta had calmed down. Soon after, she gave birth to a healthy baby without any problems. We examined the baby right there in the delivery room. Then I went to the nurse's station to log everything in our system. When I came back, Greta and her baby were gone. We told the hospital administration, but since Greta seemed stable and the baby appeared fine, they did nothing. My warnings that something might be wrong were ignored. The hospital was already overwhelmed. They didn't need more problems. A week later, Greta came back. Same time of night, same clothes. And she was pregnant again. At first I thought someone was playing a joke on me, but when I asked my co-workers about it, they acted like they had no idea what I was talking about. "She was here last week," I said. "You must have sent her home because she wasn't ready yet." "Well, now she definitely is. Hook her up to the monitor," Emma said. "No, she already gave birth last week." Emma gave me a look that was half concerned, half amused. "Maybe you should stop working nights," she said, and got to work. Everything happened exactly like before. Greta seized up, her eyes rolled back, then suddenly stopped. At exactly 2:45 a.m., she gave birth without complications. Then she disappeared again. This happened 4 more times over the next few weeks. She'd come in, seize up, give birth at 2:45 a.m., and vanish as quietly as she'd arrived. The 5th time, I noticed something on her belly. The veins formed a pattern, a circle with a square inside it. What did it mean? I couldn't stop thinking about it. So I decided to follow her next time. When she showed up again a week later, I told Emma I felt sick and needed to go home. She wasn't happy about it. The hospital was chronically short-staffed, but she let me go. I clocked out, went to the parking lot, and sat in my car where I could see her room. Right at 2:45 a.m., she had her baby. Through the window, I watched my co-workers examine the newborn, then leave the room. Moments later, Greta got up, took her baby, and walked out. A few minutes later, she came out the main entrance and crossed the parking lot. I got out and followed at a distance. She'd just given birth but walked fast and steady, like it hadn't affected her at all. Sometimes new mothers bounce back quickly. But birth is exhausting. It's like running a 9-month marathon that ends with a triathlon. It takes a toll, no matter how fit you are. Greta crossed several streets and turned into the old industrial district. The streetlights barely worked, so I followed her through the shadows until she reached an old warehouse. She stopped at a heavy, rusted door. I hid behind a parked truck. I peeked around the corner, but she was gone. Then suddenly, she was behind me. I jumped and hit my head on the truck's cab. "They're waiting for you," she said. "Who?" She didn't answer. She just walked back to the warehouse. The door opened and she went inside. I knew I shouldn't follow her, but I couldn't help myself. The open door pulled at me like a magnet. My fear melted away and turned into something else. Whatever was inside that warehouse, it was meant for me. I belonged there. I'd never been so sure of anything in my life. It was time. They were waiting. Inside, the warehouse was filled with fog. It smelled like my childhood, like the lilies my mother grew, sunscreen, and barbecue. Something moved in the fog. Large tentacles glowing neon green came toward me. As they got closer, the colors grew brighter, and the smell grew stronger. One tentacle touched me. I saw the pattern on its tip, a circle with a square in the center, and suddenly I understood everything. It was like the knowledge just appeared in my mind. They didn't have to explain. The information was simply there, like something I'd always known but forgotten. They came to our planet, not to attack us, but to hide. They're being hunted. Their species is being wiped out. Only a few survive. Those survivors fled to Earth. Here, they want to start over, but hidden inside human bodies. They're disguising their DNA as human because humans are protected. Unlike most species in the galaxy, humans can't be touched. Earth can't be invaded. Destroying humanity would throw the entire galactic system out of balance. So they found a way to use that protection for themselves, and I'm part of it. I always have been. Suddenly everything went white, blinding light. My head throbbed. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. The pain spread through my whole body. For a moment, I felt like I was breaking apart, like a crab thrown into boiling water. When the light faded, I was standing in a hallway. I recognized it. It was our delivery ward. I looked down. I was pregnant. "Can I help you?" someone said behind me. It was Emma, but she didn't recognize me. She looked concerned. "Come with me." She touched my arm gently and led me into an exam room. "What's your name?" I didn't answer right away. Then I said, "Greta." Growing up, my grandparents had one rule: don't look in Pappy's private room. When I was 16, I was sent to live with my grandparents for a month. I hadn't been there in years, but I had a strained relationship with my parents, and they thought a visit to the middle of nowhere would somehow ease the tension between us. Really, I think they just wanted to get away from me. Whatever the case, that trip to the countryside changed my life forever, in worse ways than I ever imagined. "Bye, sweetie. Behave," my mother said, waving out the window as her SUV kicked up a trail of dust. "Try to contain your excitement a little. Geez," I mumbled, turning to my smiling grandparents. "Oh, Stephen, we are so happy that you're staying with us," Grandma said, beaming at me. Her warmth was infectious. Pappy didn't say anything at first. He just clasped a meaty hand onto my shoulder. "She's right. We don't get many visitors." I grinned at him, even though internally I was screaming. "Happy to be here," I replied, praying that my facade would hold. "Come on," Grandma said, ushering me inside. "I'll show you to your room." The moment my grandmother left me alone, I whipped out my cell phone. To my horror, I discovered that I had no service. My grandparents were old school. They didn't have Wi-Fi. Every teenager's worst nightmare. "Hey, Pop," I said as I clopped down the stairs. He glanced up at me from his crossword, indicating for me to speak. My grandfather wasn't the most social man. He had a stern, no-nonsense demeanor, and he had the build to match the intimidating aura. A little part of me was always a bit afraid of him. Suddenly, My question felt absurdly stupid. Do you have internet out here? He eyed me for a moment before nodding to a dinosaur of a monitor. That's all we got. No internet connection to it, though. My heart dropped. I had a feeling that it was going to be a long summer. 2 days later, I found myself exploring the basement. It was the least inviting part of the house, poorly lit with cobwebs everywhere, and a thick layer of dust coated everything in sight. Probably not the safest place to be, but I was bored with nothing better to do. As I pulled the switch to the single light bulb dangling from the ceiling, something immediately drew my attention. A door. A single, wooden door at the far end of the basement. To my surprise, there was a note nailed to it. "Stay out, Pappy." It was obviously intended for me. The message immediately spiked my curiosity. I made my way over to it, tiptoeing across the dirt floor. It felt like I was doing something illegal, like I was about to take a leap that I couldn't take back. And that feeling was exhilarating. Once I reached my destination, my heart pounded in my throat. I took a deep breath as I reached for the knob. A boost of adrenaline surged through me as I twisted, and locked. I should have known. I turned to leave and cause mischief elsewhere. The excitement of the situation deflated. The second I did, I stopped in my tracks. Someone was blocking my path. The color drained from my face as I realized who it was. My grandfather. "What are you doing down here?" It wasn't a question. I was just looking around, I said, flashing him a weak smile. Pappy glowered down at me, his hulking frame looming overhead like a shadow. He stood there in silence for a moment before he spoke. "Get out. I don't want to see you down here again." "Yes, sir." He didn't have to tell me twice. I swerved around him and bolted back up the stairs, his burning scowl following me the entire way. I had to know what was behind that door. Pappy was obviously hiding something that he didn't want me to see. I couldn't go back down there so soon after being caught, though. No, I definitely couldn't take that risk. I decided to wait until he was out at the store to make my move. Little did I know, an opportunity would present itself sooner than I expected. That same night, I awoke at an odd hour with a sudden urge to pee. I groggily slipped out of bed, did my business, and headed to the kitchen for a glass of water. Once I was satisfied, I crept back to my room, careful not to wake Pappy and Grandma. And that's when I heard it. I had just reached the top of the landing when a low rustling emerged from somewhere deeper in the house. I don't know why I didn't go back to bed, but for whatever reason, I sat on my haunches at the top of the landing, invisible in the darkness. Footsteps clunked along the floor, and the shadow of my grandfather's towering frame came into view. He paused in the kitchen, as if he could sense my presence. For a moment, I thought he'd caught me, but to my relief, he eventually continued on his path. My brows furrowed. What was he doing down there? Being the nosy teenager I was, I had to find out. My heart dropped when I heard a door creak open. The basement. He must have been going into his secret room. I descended the stairs as quietly as I could, blood pounding in my ears like thunder. When I reached the bottom, my eyes immediately fell to the opened basement door. I scampered down the second set of steps, careful to avoid any noisy floorboards. I froze halfway and watched. Pappy was standing there, on the opposite side of the room. He rummaged around behind an old, dusty painting resting against the wall before producing a rusted key. He inserted it into the lock, and the space was illuminated with light. At that moment, my heart nearly exploded. I didn't know for certain, but I could have sworn that I saw crimson splattered on the floor. Curiosity gnawed at me like a piranha. I had to know what was in that room. I knew where Pappy was hiding the key, but I was too paranoid to check at night. He'd gotten the drop on me the last time. I didn't want to find out what would happen if he caught me again. As much as it pained me to do it, I went along with my original plan. I waited until Pape went to the store to make my move. "Going to get milk. Be back soon," he grumbled to Grandma as he snatched his keys from the hook. "Okay. Be safe," she said, returning to the pie that she was preparing in the kitchen. That was my golden opportunity. I put down the newspaper that I'd been reading and opened the door to the basement as quietly as I could. My heart pounded with each tiny creak. Fortunately for me, Grandma's hearing wasn't the best, and she didn't pick up on anything out of the ordinary. I practically flew down the stairs. I was itching to know what was inside that room. I leaned the painting forward and retrieved the key, turning to the door. The sign that Pappy had made was still there, looming over me like a sentry. My hand trembled as I placed the key in the lock and turned. This was it. Nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to witness. Dried blood caked the floor. A metal work table sat to my right with a wide array of tools. Pliers, hacksaws, hammers, their blades crusted in flaky crimson. At the far end of the room, I saw a corkboard. Dozens of newspaper articles and pictures of missing people were pinned to it. And to my left, that was what nearly made me pass out. Then and there, a yellow, dingy mattress sat in the corner. On top of it lay a corpse, maggots writhing in and out of every emaciated orifice. Its eyes were wide open, and its mouth had stiffened into a permanent scream. I took a step back as the putrid stench assaulted my nose. But just when I thought it couldn't get any worse, a sound from behind me made me freeze. Click. I slowly turned to find my grandfather standing there, a six-shooter trained on me. "Pappy, I thought you were at the store," I squeaked, my voice weak and brittle. "Forgot my wallet." He scowled at me, delivering the most hateful glare that I have ever seen in my life. He sighed, breaking the silence permeating between us. "You've seen too much, boy. I didn't want it to come to this, but you've left me no choice." Pow! A deafening gunshot ripped through the air. For a moment, I didn't feel a thing. The adrenaline surging through my system made sure of that. But when I looked down, I came to the sickening realization that my arm was blossoming with red. "Arnold, what was that?" Grandma shouted from upstairs. "Nothing. Ignore it." To my shock, she didn't reply. How much did she know? "Your grandmother's going to be upset when she finds out," Pappy said, this time raising the gun to my head and cocking the hammer. "But she'll get over it, eventually." I didn't give him the satisfaction. I couldn't. My fight or flight response kicked it just at the right time. I bolted forward, the sound of the bullet whizzing past my temple ringing in my ear as I went. I shoved my grandfather, and he stumbled, dropping the gun. I didn't stop. I leapt up the stairs, darted into the foyer, and swiped Pappy's spare set of keys from the hook. I heard his pounding footsteps pursuing me as I made a mad dash for his truck. "Get back here!" The sound of his voice booming from the depths of the basement only made me run faster. I crashed outside, unlocked the truck, and threw myself in the driver's seat. Pappy appeared in the doorway as I threw the vehicle into drive. Crash! I instinctively ducked my head as the left side mirror shattered. Pappy didn't try to shoot me again. He stood there, that awful glare burning a hole into my head as I floored it down the dirt road and far away from that house. I kept driving until I reached the nearest town. Fortunately, the bullet had only grazed me, so I wasn't in need of immediate medical attention. The police investigated my grandparents' house. What they found haunts me to this day. The bodies of my grandparents were recovered from the home. The gun was still warm in Pappy's hand when they found him. After a thorough investigation, my grandfather's crimes were made public. Aside from himself and my grandmother, he was linked to the disappearances of 13 people, and it's thought that he could have had more victims. I had to attend therapy for years afterward, just to feel normal again. Now, all this time later, I'm just thankful that I made it out of that house alive. The Shift. We met at a pool party. I remember that day clearly. It was in the middle of an unforgettable heat wave. Alfie smiled at me from across the pool, and the rest was history. Not only was he gorgeous and completely unaware of it, but he was also a fantastic listener. No matter who he spoke to, he listened intently. He was never just waiting for his turn to speak, never just nodding absent-mindedly. He absorbed every word, eyes bright and understanding. Later, when I told him that was one of my favorite things about him, he smiled and said, "Most people just want to be understood. It isn't difficult if you pay attention." He has always paid attention. Even in the early months of our relationship, he remembered everything. How I take my coffee, which side of the bed I prefer, that I can't sleep without my bedside fan or my childhood teddy. Scrappy. There had always been a quiet predictability to our life together. We'd wake up at the same time each morning. I'd shower first. He'd make coffee. We'd meet in the kitchen in the soft light of dawn before the day properly began, moving around one another with the ease that comes from long-term familiarity. Sometimes we'd talk. Sometimes we wouldn't. Silence never felt uncomfortable. Then came the shift. He was handing me my morning coffee. "Milk and 2 sugars, right?" I laughed because I thought he was joking. We'd been together for 9 years, married for 4, and I'd never taken sugar in my coffee. Not once. "No sugar, you're sweet enough," he'd say. We had both been sleeping a little less than usual lately. I put it down to nothing more than a brief moment of forgetfulness, caused by tiredness. I kissed him on the cheek, took the coffee, and told him not to worry about it. Then he started watching me sleep. Now I've always been a light sleeper. A change in temperature or a shift in the light will wake me. For years, that sensitivity never bothered me. If I woke in the early hours and turned my head, I'd find Alfie beside me exactly as expected, fast asleep with one arm tucked beneath the pillow, breathing deeply. Recently, though, I'd turn to face him and find him already awake, not moving, not on his phone, doom-scrolling, just simply lying there, looking right at me. The first time it happened, I smiled at him, still half asleep, and asked what he was doing. "Couldn't sleep," he said. "Did I wake you?" "No," I told him, and reached for his hand beneath the covers. But it kept happening, not every night, but enough for me to pick up on it. Each time the explanation was reasonable. He'd woken early. He'd had something on his mind. He hadn't wanted to disturb me by getting up. Although it made sense, it kept me up at night. There was something about the way he was watching me that bothered me. It wasn't intrusive or intense. If anything, it was gentle. The same attentive expression he'd always worn around me. But lying there in the dark, meeting his eyes before either of us had fully entered the day, I had the faint, disorienting sense that something was off. I just couldn't put my finger on what. Even with minimal sleep, life continued as it does. The usual routine of work, dinner, and an evening lounging on the sofa. All the normal things. He became more perceptive than ever, more aware of my moods, quicker to anticipate what I needed before I asked. It felt, on the surface, like a deepening of the same gentle love he'd always shown me, which is why when I'd catch him staring, I'd tell myself it was nothing more than a look of admiration. And for a while, I had no reason to believe otherwise. With time, the staring crept its way into the daytime too. I'd be washing the dishes, and would catch him in the reflection of the kitchen window, standing behind me, still as a statue, just watching me. I'd turn around and he'd spring back to life, tending to whatever menial task had previously garnered his attention. He also started repeating things I said. It would happen hours after the initial conversation, sometimes even the next day. He'd do it casually, and in a slightly altered context, as though the words had occurred to him independently. One afternoon I mentioned that the air in the house felt strangely heavy. It wasn't a particularly unusual observation, just something I had said without thinking as I opened a window. At the time, he'd simply nodded, but then later that evening, as we sat on the sofa scrolling through Netflix, he looked around the room and said those exact words. "The air feels strangely heavy." I waited for a sign that he was joking, that he was deliberately echoing me, but instead, he looked mildly contemplative, like the thought was completely his own. When I asked what he meant, he shrugged. I know it might not sound like much, but I can't express how unlike Alfie these behaviors were. There were other changes too, like slightly delayed responses. I don't think anyone else would have picked up on it, but I knew my husband like the back of my hand. He was changing. If I laughed, he laughed, but a little too late. If I frowned, he frowned, but after a pause. It felt like he was mirroring me, as though without my lead he wouldn't know which emotion to express. One evening, after a particularly shitty day at work, I relayed my frustrations to him. It was nothing dramatic, just office politics, the sort of thing we discussed 100 times before. As I spoke, I watched his face. For a brief moment after I finished, his expression remained completely neutral. Then, as if remembering what should come next, his features arranged themselves into sympathy. "That sounds frustrating," he said. The words were correct. The tone was correct too. And yet, for reasons I couldn't properly justify, I felt uncomfortable. Enough was enough. I decided I would call him out on it, hoping to clear things up to stop me feeling so on edge all the time. "You've been a bit different lately," I said one day as we cleared the dishes, hoping I didn't sound too accusatory. He looked up at me, his expression blank. Different? The word hung between us for a moment. I felt a flicker of embarrassment, wondering if maybe I shouldn't have said anything. I opened my mouth to soften the blow, to explain that I hadn't meant anything serious by it, but he spoke first. "I'm sorry if it feels that way. Work's been taking up more space in my head than I realized." His voice was warm, reassuring, just like always. I nodded, already prepared to let the matter go. But then, in that same even tone, he continued, "You've seemed a little on edge yourself recently." "What?" I said, surprised. "I assumed that maybe you were just tired. You haven't been sleeping properly." He was right. I hadn't. With a small, sympathetic smile, Alfie stepped closer, resting his hand lightly against my arm. "You've been noticing things more, haven't you?" I nodded. Sometimes when you focus on the little things too much, they start to feel bigger than they are. I contemplated his words. It wasn't until that exact moment I considered maybe I had been the problem all along. The conversation began with me expressing a small uncertainty about him, but now I was questioning myself instead. "Yeah," I eventually replied. "Like you said, I'm probably just tired." From then on, I deliberately tried to stop noticing things, telling myself that it's easy for ordinary behaviors to appear unusual if you examine them too closely. So instead, when he paused before responding, I'd tell myself he was just thinking. When I caught him looking at me from across the room, I assumed he was just admiring me. When small details slipped, like a forgetful moment or a repeated phrase, I let them pass without comment. This worked at first. The house felt calmer, but underneath that calm ran a thin, persistent awareness that I was working quite hard to maintain it, that I was adjusting my own perception so that nothing he did would seem unusual enough to question. I snapped out of that mindset one evening when he did something so strange and out of character that I just couldn't ignore it. I'd been brushing my teeth when I caught him staring again. I spun around and met his gaze, expecting him to smile or say something. He didn't move. He didn't break eye contact. He just stood there, hands by his sides, head tilted slightly, staring. Something about his eyes bothered me. They were a little too wide, and there was a flicker of something I couldn't quite place. And with it came a feeling I'd never felt towards Offley before. Dread. After what felt like eternity, he parted his lips to speak. "You've been brushing your teeth for a while now. Everything okay?" How long had he been standing there? He walked towards me, eyes unblinking. Instinctively, I took a step back. He noticed and let out a chuckle, seemingly amused by my uncertainty. I tried to stand my ground as he approached me further, but my body flinched as he raised a hand to my shoulder. Another chuckle. "Come on, darling. Let's go to bed." My heart sank. Darling? He never called me that. I was certain then. He was different. So in the days that followed, I began testing him. While pretending everything was fine, I purposefully changed small details in my stories to see how he'd react. The old Offley would have questioned me, maybe gently corrected me, but this altered Alfie didn't register. Or if he did, he didn't let on. I spoke about the day we first met, describing it as a snowy day in December. He didn't correct me, so I kept going. I talked about wearing a brown fur coat when we passed each other on the street. I told an entirely fabricated story, watching him closely, waiting for him to burst out laughing or call me out on my bullshit, but he didn't. He listened without interruption, smiling softly. That evening, as we lay in bed in the dark, he rolled onto his side and said softly, "You're as beautiful as you were the day I met you." I froze, waiting to see if he'd taken the bait. I knew even then that you were someone I could build a life with. That beautiful snowy day changed everything for me. I felt sick. I rolled over and pretended to be asleep. But I didn't sleep at all that night. I lay there, staring at the wall, wondering where the Offley I knew and loved had gone. I cried softly as he slept, oblivious to my heartache. The next morning he handed me my coffee. 2 sugars, he said. Extra sweet, just like you. I set the mug down on the counter a little too forcefully, startling him. "We didn't meet in December," I said flatly. "It was August, during that awful heat wave, remember?" He looked up at me, confused. "No," he said slowly. "It was definitely December. It was snowing. You were wearing that brown fur coat." I scoffed and shook my head. "I've never owned a fur coat in my life. You know I hate fur." He held my gaze as if waiting for me to correct myself. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely sure," I snapped, grabbing the mug and pouring its contents down the sink. "And I don't take sugar in my coffee." "Yes, you do. You always have. 2 sugars, sweet like you. Are you feeling all right?" "No," I snapped. "No sugar. I'm sweet enough." We stood in silence waiting for the other to cave. "Sorry," he muttered eventually. "I've been a bit forgetful recently. I'm sure you're right." He looked genuinely sorry, and I felt a pang of guilt. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't said anything unkind. And there I was, snapping at him, slamming things about. Something I never did, not even on our worst days. I had acted out of character, and the irony of that was not lost on me. I exhaled deeply, the fight draining out of me as quickly as it had arrived. "No, I'm sorry," I said quietly, unable to meet his eyes. "I shouldn't have snapped like that." He accepted my apology and kissed my cheek before leaving for work. Once again, I couldn't shake the creeping suspicion that perhaps this really was all my fault, that I was the one distorting ordinary moments into something they weren't. I felt like I was losing my mind. That evening, I would doubt my sanity once again. I was getting ready for bed, only Scrappy wasn't on the pillow where I'd left him. "Alf," I called, tearing apart the duvet and searching under the bed. He appeared in the doorway, wearing a pair of blue pajamas I'd never seen before. He normally slept in his boxers. "I can't find Scrappy," I said, putting the pajamas to the back of my mind. I've looked everywhere. I was met with the blank stare I was becoming all too familiar with. Scrappy, I repeated. I can't find him. Alfie pointed to the cupboard. Why's he in there? I asked. You put him there. What? No, I didn't. Yeah? You did. You definitely put him in there this morning. I watched you do it. I tried to think back, but all I could remember of that morning was Alfie's sorry expression and the guilt I'd felt for accusing him of being different. A dull ache pulsed behind my eyes, so I closed them, pinching the bridge of my nose. Maybe he was right. Perhaps I'd accidentally tidied Scrappy away. That didn't feel right to me, but it wasn't entirely impossible. I couldn't focus in the office the next day. He had definitely been wrong, hadn't he? Of course we met in the summer, right? Had I really put Scrappy in the wardrobe by mistake? Then I started to wonder if it even mattered at all. I eventually concluded that perhaps it didn't, and once again, I was prepared to let it all go. I stopped by the bakery on my way home from work to get some of those blueberry muffins he loved. A peace offering, a way to put this whole thing behind us. I let myself in the front door, box of muffins tucked under one arm. Before I could shout, "Hello," I noticed him sitting on the sofa with his hands placed neatly in his lap. He wasn't doing anything, just sitting there, staring at the TV. It was switched off. Our eyes met in the reflection of the black screen, and he slowly turned to face me. He raised his arm robotically and gave a forced, unnatural wave of his hand. "Ah, you bought muffins?" His voice was devoid of emotion. "Chocolate?" "Blueberry." "Oh." His mouth formed a thin line, and he slowly turned away from me. "I thought they were your favorite," I said to the back of his head. "I'm allergic to blueberries." I stood there, dumbfounded. He absolutely was not allergic to blueberries. He wasn't allergic to fucking anything. Anger surged through my veins, but I bit my tongue. He was messing with me. He had to be. "You weren't the last time you ate them," I muttered. "Look," he replied, taking a deep breath and turning to face me. "I don't know what's going on with you recently, and I didn't really want to say anything, but I'm starting to get worried. You keep getting things confused, and it's clearly making you angry. That's so unlike you. You've just been so different lately." "Me?" I scoffed. "You're the one who keeps staring at me and copying me and being all fucking weird." I had never raised my voice at Alfie before. He looked shocked, then disappointed. He shook his head solemnly. "See what I mean?" he said quietly. "You've got it all backwards. You're the one doing all those things. I wake up in the night and you're just watching me, staring at me. And you keep repeating things I've said, really weird, insignificant things like, 'Ooh, the air feels strangely heavy in here,' when I'd literally said that exact phrase only hours before. What? There was no way. That couldn't be possible. Could it?" My heart began to thud and my head spun, causing me to stumble backwards. Alfie jumped up and rushed over, offering me his arm. I took it, trying to swallow the sickness that was creeping up from the pit of my stomach. "Let's talk about this later, okay?" he said softly, before kissing my forehead. "Why don't you go take a nice bath? We can both take a moment to cool off and we'll have a chat this evening. Sound good?" I nodded. I took myself upstairs, locking the bathroom door behind me. For a while I just stood there, hands clutching the edge of the sink as I stared at my own reflection. The skin under my eyes was puffy, almost purple. I tried to slow down the sudden, shallow rhythm of my breathing. How could I possibly be the one in the wrong? I was certain that blueberry muffins were his favorite. We'd had blueberry cake at our wedding too. It had this beautiful pale, baby blue icing, with fresh blueberries cascading down one side. I was sure of it. I made a mental note to dig out the photo album later and prove it to myself. I turned the taps on, letting the bathroom fill with steam as thoughts whirred around in my mind. I squeezed my eyes shut as a sharp, pulsing headache pressed behind my temples. I shifted my focus to the sound of the rushing water, waiting for the pain to fade into a dull ache. When I opened my eyes, the water had nearly risen to the rim of the tub. I lurched forward and twisted the taps, not bothering to question how long I'd zoned out for. I lowered myself into the bath. The house was quiet, and the warm water offered some sense of comfort. My eyelids grew heavy, and I allowed them to close, focusing on my breath. In, out. In, out. I stayed like that for a while, before drifting into a dreamless sleep. A loud creak woke me up. I glanced over at the locked door. The thin strip of light beneath it dimmed suddenly. A shadow. Every muscle in my body went rigid as I stared at that narrow line. Someone was standing there, right on the other side of the door, not moving, not knocking, just there. I could feel it in the air the way you can feel someone's presence even without seeing them. That unmistakable awareness of another body occupying the space just inches away from yours. Seconds dragged past, heavy and distorted. My heart pounded. Then, without warning, the shadow vanished. Erratic footsteps tore down the hallway outside, thundering away from the door. Too fast, too uneven. A chaotic scramble that sent a violent jolt through my entire body. I flinched so hard that the water sloshed over the side of the tub. The sound stopped as abruptly as it had begun, leaving behind a suffocating silence that pressed in from all sides. Had that really just happened? Had I been dreaming? In a daze, I reached for a towel and dried myself off. In the bedroom, I put on my pajamas, grabbing Scrappy from the bed and pulling him close to my chest. I lingered in the doorway for a moment before forcing myself into the hall and down the stairs. When I reached the bottom and looked into the living room, I stopped. Everything was wrong. The sofa was pressed up against a different wall, with a blanket I'd never seen before folded neatly over the back of it. The TV sat on the other side of the room. In fact, every piece of furniture was in a completely different place. I looked at the curtains. They used to be gray, but now were blue. The candles on the side table were green, not orange. But most disturbingly of all, there, on the mantelpiece, was a photo from our wedding. Slowly, I edged towards it. "Babe?" Alfie appeared from the kitchen. I leant in, examining the picture. We were cutting the cake, our plain white wedding cake. I collapsed to my knees. Alfie hurried across the room, his footsteps quick but careful. He crouched down beside me, lifting my chin with his finger. "Hey, what is it?" he asked, his voice low and soft. The kindness in it was too much. My chest tightened, and before I could stop myself, I began to cry. I buried my face in his chest, clutching his shirt. He wrapped his arms around me without hesitation, holding me close as I shook against him. "It's going to be okay," he whispered. "I've got you." I took the next few days off work, and so did Alfie. I didn't ask him to, but he insisted. He held my hand as I made a call to the doctors, setting up an appointment for the following week. He brought me coffee. Black, no sugar. He even rearranged the furniture just to put me at ease. "Huh, I like it better this way," he said as he stood back and admired the room. I smiled. "Thank you," I said, weakly. My head still throbbed and my eyes were still crusty from all the tears, but I felt okay. For the first time in a while, I felt hopeful. Alfie was right. It was going to be okay. We went to the appointment together. The doctor didn't look at me when he spoke. "Stress," he said, tapping something into the computer. "And exhaustion. Very common." He printed the prescription and handed it to me. "These will help you sleep. Deep sleep. That's what you need." Alfie squeezed my hand with a reassuring smile. The first week of taking the tablets was bliss. I'd pop a pill and fall asleep within minutes. And it was a good sleep too. dreamless, like I was dead to the world. But nothing lasts forever, apparently, as sometime during the second week I started feeling the side effects. I kept having these awful nightmares. In them, I'd wake up to find Alfie acting strangely. In one dream, he was completely naked and hunched over, his mouth hanging open in a wide, unnatural smile that stretched the skin of his cheeks. In another, I rolled over in bed to find him staring at me, his eyes so wide I could see the whites all the way around the irises. Every time, I'd squeeze my eyes shut, willing the dream to end. Eventually, I'd fall back asleep and wake up sometime later in a cold sweat. I'd tell Alfie about the nightmares each morning. He'd listen, frowning, equally as disturbed by them as I was. He suggested that perhaps my brain was just adjusting to the medication, that eventually the dreams would stop. "I hope so," I said. "I don't know how much more of this I can take." "They're not real, remember? Just dreams." I nodded. "Just dreams." That night I awoke suddenly, heart thudding. I sat up. The bedroom door was slightly ajar, and at the end of the hallway, something moved. He was there, on all fours. My husband was crouched at the end of the corridor, his spine arched strangely high. His head hung low between his shoulders. His eyes were wide, wild, and fixed on me. Alfie. His mouth opened, that same huge, silent smile. Then he moved. With a jerking of limbs, he scurried at an inhuman speed, palms and feet slapping the floor as he rushed towards the bedroom. I shrieked and threw myself back into bed, dragging the covers over my head. The mattress dipped as he climbed onto it. I squeezed my eyes shut and held my breath, waiting for fingers, teeth, anything. I woke gasping for air. Morning light filled the room. The door was closed, Alfie's side of the bed cold and empty. That night I didn't take a tablet. I kept this information to myself, not wanting to concern Alfie. I waited until he was in the bathroom, then slipped the tablet back into the bottle and returned it to the bedside drawer. When he came to bed, I pretended to swallow it with a sip of water. I lay awake for hours, waiting for nightmares that never came. At some point, Alfie stirred next to me. I closed my eyes and pretended to sleep, not wanting him to question why I was awake. I felt a soft tap on my shoulder. Damn it, I thought. He's on to me. I kept my breathing slow and heavy, counting a few seconds before stirring to make my sleepy act seem more convincing. When I rolled over, his voice came from across the room. "Over here!" When my eyes adjusted to the night, I saw him standing rigidly in the corner of the room. His eyes bulged from his face, as though something inside his skull was pushing them outward. Saliva dripped from his gaping mouth, which was stretched into a wide, panting grin. Something at his side shimmered in the light of the moon. A knife. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. I watched in horror as he slowly raised the blade to his neck, dragging it gently across his throat in a silent, mocking promise. I shut my eyes tightly and turned away, burrowing beneath the duvet, my body locked in terror as I felt him crawl back into bed. He fell asleep not long after. I lay awake trembling, still unable to move. When the morning light finally crept through the curtains, and I heard him rise to start his day, I realized what I'd witnessed hadn't been a dream at all. Because I had never fallen asleep, I made a plan to pack up my things and get the hell out of there. Whether I was imagining it or not, I couldn't risk staying in that house with him. He checked on me before leaving for work. As I lay in bed, pretending to be sick, I mumbled some excuse about calling the office to tell them I wasn't coming in. He rested his hand on my forehead, and it took every ounce of my being not to recoil. "You do feel clammy," he said, feigning a look of concern. "Do you want me to stay with you?" My pulse raced. "No," I said, trying to sound casual. "No point. I'll be asleep for most of the day, I imagine." He nodded. "Okay, well, Take it easy. I'll be back this evening to look after you. I love you." I waited for the sound of the front door to close behind him before springing out of bed. I just needed the essentials: my keys, my phone, my charger, my purse. I'd figure the rest out later. I shoved my things into a bag and hurried down the stairs. Shit. Scrappy. I ran back up to the bedroom. He wasn't on the bed. He wasn't under it. The wardrobe. I flung open the cupboard and rifled through its contents. He was buried beneath a pile of clothes that had fallen from their hangers. I went to grab him, but something else caught my eye. The glossy corner of a photograph peeked out from a small gap in the back panel of the wardrobe. A sickening thought crossed my mind. Pressing gently against it, the panel shifted with a soft, reluctant creak, revealing a narrow seam that hadn't been there before. Heart hammering, I pushed it further. It was a secret compartment. I took a closer look at the photo that had led me to this discovery. Vomit rose in my throat, my hands shaking as the picture fell from my gentle grasp. It was us on our wedding day, cutting our cake, our blueberry cake. Reluctantly, I leant forward, peering into the compartment. Hannah. Our photo albums were back there, but they looked different. I pulled one out and opened it. On every page, sticky notes clung to the photographs. Frantic arrows, underlines, suggestions. The notes didn't describe our memories. They dissected them, speculating how each image could be changed, reframed, and made to say something else entirely. There was a picture of us in the living room when we first moved in together. The furniture was exactly where I'd remembered it being. A cold, sharp dread settled in my chest as the pieces fell into place. Every conversation that had left me doubting myself, every time I caught him staring at me, every odd behavior, every time he'd convince me I was the problem, all of it had been orchestrated. By him, by Alfie, by the love of my life. The slow erosion of my sanity hadn't been accidental. For months and months he sowed the seed of doubt in my mind, manipulating me, tricking me, fucking gaslighting me. All of it had been real, and all of it had been him. I sat there on the bedroom floor, a sea of emotions rushing through me. I felt everything all at once, and it was too much for me to deal with then and there. A voice in the back of my head told me it would take years of therapy to unpack this. I wouldn't be able to trust anyone ever again. Numbly, I retrieved my belongings and descended the stairs. The urgency I'd had only minutes ago had completely left my body. There wasn't room for it. I was halfway to the door when it opened toward me. Only me! I forgot my... We stopped. Our eyes met. With a look of concern I knew was pretend, Alfie examined my face, checking for tears, for anger, for anything that might tell him what he was walking into. I watched him do it. I watched the familiar softness appear, that careful attentiveness he wore when he thought something was wrong. Then he saw it. He saw that I knew. His concern vanished in an instant. It was as if a switch had been flipped behind his eyes. The warmth replaced with something icy and cold. "You figured it out," he said. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I didn't run. I simply looked back at the stranger in front of me, the love I once had for him, non-existent. "Why?" I asked. "Why did you do it?" He shrugged. "No," I said. "I need an answer. It's the least I deserve." His eyes were steady and clear, but eerily empty, as if nothing human stirred behind them. Because I could. And that was it. All that he'd done, all that he'd put me through. There was no reason, no master plan. It was all for sport. I pushed past him, door closing behind me as I headed for my car. I sat with my hands on the wheel as I stared back at the house we'd shared together. It was nothing more to me now than a pile of bricks. While reversing out the drive, unsure of where I was going, a realization hit me. I understood with a cold and final clarity that the most terrifying part wasn't what he'd done. It wasn't why he'd done it. It was how easily he would go on living now, untouched, unbothered, while I gathered the scattered pieces of my mind he had so carefully, deliberately broken, just because he could. I bought talking buttons for my cat, but the cat wasn't the only one who used them. It's actually my youngest son's cat who learned to use the buttons. I inherited the cat after my son lost control of his car on the icy roads last winter. It happened on the day he received a scholarship to his top college choice. He and his boyfriend were feeling on top of the world and were on their way back home from a trip. His boyfriend survived. He did not. You cannot imagine the grief. Either you have experienced the loss of a child, or you haven't. I did not weep, not at the funeral nor for many weeks after. I became a stone, an object. It was as if all the sorrow were locked far from reach. Instead of feeling anything, I simply thought many times of retrieving the pistol that I owned from its case in the back of my closet. And on a few occasions I even went and took it and sat with it, feeling its weight in my hand. My son Vinny to his friends, was my world. One day he would have been famous, I am sure of it. You may think that is a father's pride talking. Maybe it is, but he had a music scholarship. He would have performed for presidents and world leaders. In my mind, when I see him, it is usually at his piano, playing for his cat. When he was 15, I promised him a kitten if he did well in school, and he picked out this tabby, the tiniest and angriest tabby in the world, and named her Terry. She loved only him, and hissed and growled at anyone else who came near, including me. She also peed on his clothes, and on mine, and on my bed. To say I wanted to get rid of Terrible Terry, as I called her, is an understatement. But then my brilliant son died, and suddenly it was just me and Terrible Terry and the gun. I felt nothing but resentment toward the cat. But she spent hours and hours slouched on the windowsill in his bedroom, where she always sat while he played piano. I used to think she sat there to watch the birds and couldn't care less about his playing. Now she didn't even lift her head. She just loafed on the sill, as if waiting for him to come bursting in and pull the dust cover off and play. And there were the buttons. You've seen them, I'm sure. Those gimmicky buttons that people get to train animals to talk. Bunch of nonsense, if you ask me. What has a dog got to say? Nothing but food, probably. And anyway, people are supposed to give commands to dogs, not the other way around. But Vinny would watch all these videos of dogs and sometimes cats pressing the buttons. Even though, to be honest, the cat videos he showed me looked like the cats walking onto the buttons completely by accident. And that's what I told him. Complete waste of money. People wishfully projecting their ideas onto their pets. The cat pressed "love you" and meant it. Ha! Cats only know hunger and selfish desires. Well, my stubborn, dreamy-eyed, cat-loving son bought a set of those buttons. He pre-recorded dozens of them, but began with just a handful. Food, cuddle, outside, music, Dad, and Vinny. Yes, he put me and himself as buttons, and music too, because he was convinced in his silly teenage way that the cat liked his music and might want to request it. Terry was terrified of those buttons. No matter how he tried to train her, she refused to use them. She hissed. She swatted. She wouldn't go near them. She knew exactly what they were for, I'm sure of it. She even knew the words because he'd say to her, "Let's have some music." And she would go to her perch by the piano and wait for him. But when it came to the buttons, she refused. Terry loved those buttons about as much as I loved Terry. But then, like I said, came the accident. Suddenly my son was gone. The house felt wrong. Empty. Terry was a husk. I put food out, but she didn't eat. I didn't know how to read her signals. She hissed at me if I came near. I decided I should get rid of her. I couldn't keep his cat. The cat hated me anyway. I will get rid of her, I thought, and then I will be done with me too. But I couldn't bring myself to get rid of my son's cat. and I couldn't shoot myself while the cat was still alive. And so we were stuck, me and the cat. And then one night, I was up in my room contemplating the gun when I heard the recorded voice downstairs speak, Vinny. I assumed it must be a mistake. She must have walked over the button, but then it came again. Vinny, Vinny, Vinny. I stood there, listening to that cat press Vinny over and over, and tears came into my eyes. It was like a key turning in a lock, a crack in the dam that then finally burst. I gasped, loud, gulping sobs. Finally, the tears came from my son. And when the flood was over, I came down and found tiny Terry sitting by the buttons, looking miserable. And I scooped her up and told her, I miss him too. And for once, she didn't swat me. She gave only the smallest growl. I put her down and got her some food. Got myself some too. We both ate. That was the beginning. Since then, I've added more buttons. You see, I'm not an animal person. I didn't understand Terry's body language, her wants and needs, without the buttons. She finally started using them, training me. I guess they say cats do that. She has a wet food button, a kibble button. She has a no button to use if I show her the wrong food. I also added from my son's collection the love you button. Yes, I confess, I did add it. And a Terry button. And I began to make a habit of pressing love you Vinny and love you Terry. I was genuinely in shock how much she communicated. The first time she pressed Dad love you, I almost broke down all over. I couldn't believe it. She looked like she wasn't even trying. She just casually walked over the buttons. But it was deliberate. It happened more than once. I still hadn't learned to read her cat body language at all. But with the buttons, I understood her, and I felt like I had a part of my son with me. Sometimes she said things that just cracked open my soul, like when she looked at me with those big round eyes one time and hit Vinny home. I wish he was home too, I told her. It was uncanny, the things we could discuss. We'd have entire conversations. I know it sounds nuts. I'd have thought myself nuts just a couple of months before. But I added buttons so fast, and she took to all of them. I asked her once if she understood what happened to Vinny. She replied with Vinny, bye-bye. I'd added the bye-bye button to tell her whenever I was leaving the house. Then she asked me Vinny home. I had to tell her no, Vinny bye-bye. And she stubbornly insisted again, Vinny home. And she walked away angry, I think, that I couldn't make Vinny come back. But the reason I'm sharing this story and sharing this story here is because of what happened last week. Last week, my son Liam came to see me. Liam is Vin's older half-brother. He's nearly a decade older than Vin from a previous relationship, and unfortunately, Liam inherited all of his mother's worst traits. It is always the same with him. He begs for money, gets abusive if I do not give it, and disappears once I have made him a loan he will never repay. I cut off all funds to him a few years ago and told him I would no longer enable his habits. While I'd never cut him entirely out of my life, I hadn't allowed him to visit when Vinny was alive because of the way he'd treated Vinny on a previous visit, when he'd sneeringly accused me of favoring that mincing little... I won't repeat his hateful words for his younger brother. When he showed up on my doorstep, he had the smell of whiskey on his breath, and he looked wild-eyed and anxious. "Dad," he said, and then hugged me tight. "I'm sorry about Vin." It shocked me so much, I hugged him right back, and he came in and sat down and asked how I was doing. He was surprisingly solicitous. I didn't understand why. His usual meanness didn't come through at all until he noticed a growling Terry. "You still have that little piss queen?" he asked, and reached a hand for her, only for her to swat and run away. "Little shit," he said. "Her name is Terry," I said defensively. He laughed. "Didn't you used to call her Terrible Terry? She doesn't pee on things anymore." From the button area came presses of bye-bye. "She wants you to go bye-bye," I said. "She can fuck off." She's not your son. I am. Bye-bye. I didn't like the way he talked to the cat. Though a few minutes later, after she peed on his shoes, I found his anger more understandable, and I locked her up to prevent him from harming her. But he seemed genuinely sad about Vinny, and even asked about Vinny's boyfriend and his recovery after the crash. I wondered if he had come over to try to patch things up between us. Maybe to start off on better footing, like me and Terry had, until he asked me what was going to happen to Vinny's college fund. I haven't decided yet, I told him. I'm still processing all of this. But he's not going to use it, right? I mean, even before the accident, the money you'd been saving for him. He had a scholarship, right? He wasn't going to need it, and he definitely won't need it now. Dad, I could use a loan. Liam! You still have one son left, Dad, he burst, and there was the old rage. Why do you always treat me like this? Even when he's dead, he still deserves more than I do. I bet you cut me out of your will too, huh? I did not. You didn't? No. You both get equal shares. Oh, okay. He calmed down. Sorry. I just have a lot of resentment, I guess. I'm sorry. But about the loan, is there any way... I will have to think on it. Okay. You think I'll make us drinks, okay? I should have known what was happening when he went into the kitchen and was fumbling around longer than necessary. I should have known, but how could I? I had already lost one son. How could I suspect the other? How could I imagine the worst? I wanted to believe things would be better. I drank the alcohol he put in front of me without thinking. I assumed the wooziness was just the booze. It had been a long time since I'd had a real drink. Somewhere in the bedroom where she was locked up, Terry was howling her little heart out. I'd never heard her make those sounds and said I was going to let her out. But when I got up, the whole world lurched. Liam's arms caught me, and he said, "Got you, Dad." And then kept whispering in my ear, his breath still reeking, Sorry, but you're making me do this. If you just give me that fucking loan." I didn't start to panic, really panic, until he propped me up on the sofa and went upstairs with the question, "You still keep your gun in the closet?" The fear hit me in a wave then. I felt like I was floating, like I was drifting away from my body, like I was lost in some strange and horrible dream. I tried to stand, to stumble to the table and grab my phone, but I fell and heard the crack of my head against the table's edge. The ground came up to meet me. Pain shot through my skull. Footsteps thudded overhead, cursing as he rifled through my closet. I tried to pull myself up again, finally managed to grab my phone. The screen swam in my vision. My fingers were fat and clumsy as I tried to push the keys to call for help. A hand smacked the phone out of my grip. "It's 'cause you won't help me," Liam rambled as he again wrapped his arms around me to try to get me onto the sofa. "Everyone knows you're depressed. Suicidal. Can't handle Vinny's death. You should have just done it, man. If you'd just done it, I wouldn't have to." "Plah," I gasped. "This is the only way. This is how it was going to be anyway. You don't even want to live anyway. In your own way, you're helping me out here in the end," he said. And then, in response to the howling from the other room, he suddenly shrieked, "Shut the fuck up!" The howling stopped. Liam glared toward the door, his breaths coming hard and fast, then looked back at me. Everything had become so blurry. His words were a garble, his features a haze. I felt the cold muzzle of the gun against my temple as my heart galloped in my chest. From Vinny's room came a sharp rustle, like a curtain or a sheet. And then the piano, the notes of a piano. "The hell?" Liam's voice slurred through my drugged haze. "Is someone here?" The playing continued, unsteady, but beautiful. Unmistakably Claire de Lune, just like Vinny had always played, but slower, halting. And I wondered, it couldn't be the cat, could it? It almost sounded like the cat walking deliberately across the keys, the same way she walked across the buttons. But that would have been impossible. "Who's there?" snarled Liam, V was all I could manage. He snatched up the gun and stalked toward the bedroom door. In my blurry vision, he wavered back and forth. And when he opened the door, there at the piano was a figure, flickering and impossible. A figure that both was and was not there. And Liam screamed and raised his arm, and the world exploded as the gun went off. And then there was the yowling of the cat, and the cat came charging out, all bristling like a tiger, and with her that same figure from the piano, and Liam was screaming in terror and fired the gun again and ran out the door. What I remember next is waking in the ER. Neighbors apparently called police after hearing the gunshots. When I was discharged and returned home, my head wrapped from the concussion, I was relieved to find Terry whole and unharmed. She hurried over to greet me, tail up. I'd finally started picking up her body language to know a greeting when I saw it. But it wasn't just the tabby greeting me, I knew. You see, I'd finally realized something. A cat can't play a piano, and this cat couldn't use buttons, not of her own volition. Maybe it hadn't been Terry talking to me all along. Maybe it was, and always had been, Vinny. And so as I extended my hand, and Terry rubbed my knuckles, I told her, I love you. I won't ever hurt myself. I promise I will survive. You can be free. I love you. Terry rubbed my hand again, and rubbed my face when I bent my head to hers. Then she padded over to the buttons and walked across them, and I listened to my son's recorded voice. Love you. Love you. Bye-bye. Terry hasn't touched those buttons since. But every once in a while, when I'm very deep in dreams, I think I hear the sound of the piano.